Please, stay, we need more. These desperate words echoed across the ruins of occupied Japan. The U.S. Army sent a black medic to heal the enemy, never expecting what would happen next. In the ashes of Yokohama, two worlds collided. A soldier who saved lives while his own commanders watched in disapproval. A Japanese mother who bowed in gratitude while her neighbors called her traitor. Their connection was forbidden, their kindness punished. In a land where compassion crossed enemy lines, both sides scrambled to keep them apart. When a photograph captured what the military tried to hide, a storm was coming, one that would wash away the boundaries between occupied and occupier. What happens when humanity defies the rules of war? And how do you silence a story that speaks louder than any battle cry? The truck rattled over bomb craters, jerking Private Isaiah Brooks awake. His medical kit slid across the dusty floor as they hit another pothole. The September heat pressed down, mixing with the smell of ash and rot. 2 weeks since Japan surrendered, and Yokohama still smoldered. "End of the line, boys," the driver called. Isaiah grabbed his kit and jumped down. His boots landed in mud mixed with broken concrete. The devastation stretched in all directions, buildings with their faces torn off, telephone poles tipped like broken matchsticks, streets buckled like wrinkled fabric. "Brooks, stop gawking and get your gear." Sergeant Warren Miller's voice cracked like a whip. "Yes, sir," Isaiah answered, shoulders straightening automatically. He'd learned in basic training that being a Negro in the U.S. Army meant being twice as fast, twice as respectful. Miller pointed to a 2-story building with half its roof missing. "That's our field hospital. Former school. Colonel says we're winning hearts and minds now." He spat in the dust. "Medical supplies go there. You bunk in the tent behind it." Isaiah nodded, hefting his pack. A group of Japanese civilians, scavenging in nearby ruins, froze like deer caught in headlights. They watched the soldiers with careful, blank expressions before melting away between collapsed walls. "They still think we might shoot them," another soldier muttered. "Some of us might," someone answered with a hard laugh. Isaiah kept his eyes forward. The war might be over, but the hatreds it had fed were still alive and hungry. The schoolhouse-turned-clinic smelled of antiseptic and dust. Sunlight spilled through holes in the ceiling, creating bright puddles on the floor. Children's drawings still hung on one wall, curling at the edges. In the corner, a small Buddha statue watched with peaceful eyes. "You're setting up in the back room," Miller said. "Major says we gotta patch up civilians now. Propaganda bullshit. Do the minimum." Isaiah kept his face neutral. "I'll get organized, Sergeant." "Remember who you're working for, Brooks. Don't get ideas about playing hero to these people. They were killing our boys a month ago." Through a cracked wall, Isaiah saw small faces appear and disappear, children watching the Americans with a mixture of fear and curiosity. One boy stared longer at Isaiah, eyes widening at his dark skin. Isaiah began unpacking bandages and sulfa powder. As a medic in the segregated army, he'd gotten used to working in the background, to being both essential and invisible. His hands, capable of stitching wounds and setting bones, were the same hands that weren't allowed to touch white soldiers in some units. Yet here, in this strange, broken land, those same hands might build something different. As the day faded, Isaiah worked steadily, organizing the sparse supplies. A young Japanese boy was brought in with a high fever. The white medics waved him away. "Not our problem," one said. "Let their own people handle it." Isaiah caught the boy's father's desperate eyes. He gestured them over to his corner. "Brooks, what are you doing?" a corporal called. "My job," Isaiah answered quietly, placing a cool cloth on the boy's forehead. The father bowed repeatedly, hands trembling. "Playing doctor for the Japs now?" Another soldier laughed. "Guess they don't mind taking help from a colored?" Isaiah pretended not to hear, focusing on the child's pulse, the father's grateful nods. As dusk turned the sky orange, through the bombed windows, Isaiah finished his shift. He stepped outside, stretching his back. The air had cooled slightly, carrying the scent of cooking fires from somewhere in the ruins. That's when he heard it, a woman's voice, desperate and thin, calling for help in Japanese. It came from a pile of collapsed homes across the road. Isaiah grabbed his medical kit without thinking and ran toward the sound. The voice grew stronger as Isaiah approached. Through the twilight haze, he made out a woman struggling with a fallen beam. Her hands were bloody from trying to lift it, her face streaked with tears and dirt. When she saw him, she froze, terror replacing desperation. "I'm here to help," Isaiah said, pointing to his medic armband. He made lifting motions with his hands. "Help, I can help." The woman hesitated, glancing beneath the beam where small fingers protruded. A child was trapped. "Please," Isaiah said, setting down his kit. "Let me help." Something in his voice, the gentle authority that had calmed wounded men on battlefield stretchers, seemed to reach her. She stepped back, watching him warily. Isaiah bent and tested the beam. It was heavy, but he could shift it enough. "I'm going to lift," he said slowly, pantomiming the action. "You pull the child out." He pointed to her, then to the trapped hands. She nodded, understanding. Isaiah took a deep breath, braced himself, and heaved upward. The wooden beam groaned. Sweat burst on his forehead, muscles burning. The woman darted forward, reaching underneath. She pulled out a boy, perhaps 7 years old, unconscious but breathing. His arm was bent at a wrong angle, face pale beneath the dirt. Isaiah lowered the beam carefully and knelt beside them. The woman clutched the boy protectively, uncertain. "I'm a medic," Isaiah said, tapping his armband again. "Doctor." He pointed to the boy. "Let me see." Her eyes searched his face, not just the color of his skin, which clearly puzzled her, but something deeper, as if measuring his character. Finally, she nodded. Isaiah worked quickly, checking for bleeding, feeling for broken bones beyond the obvious arm fracture. The boy's breathing was shallow but steady. No signs of internal bleeding. The arm would need proper setting, but it wasn't life-threatening. He opened his kit and took out a small vial. "Medicine," he explained, showing her before giving the boy a small dose to ease pain and reduce fever. Using gestures and simple words, he instructed the woman how to help as he splinted the arm with pieces of wood from the rubble. She followed his directions perfectly, her initial fear giving way to focused attention. When they finished, the boy stirred slightly, moaning. "Kenji," the woman whispered, stroking his face. "Is that his name?" Isaiah asked, pointing to the child. She nodded. Then, touching her own chest, she said, "Aiko, Aiko Tanaka." "Isaiah Brooks," he responded, hand to his heart. Aiko bowed deeply, her forehead nearly touching the ground. The gesture contained more than politeness. It held disbelief and gratitude so profound it seemed painful. Her shoulders trembled slightly as she straightened. "The boy needs more care," Isaiah said, knowing she wouldn't understand his words, but hoping his tone conveyed the meaning. He pantomimed carrying the child to the clinic, hospital. Aiko nodded, gathering the boy in her arms. Isaiah gently stopped her and lifted the child himself. Kenji was light, too light, speaking of too many missed meals. As they walked toward the field clinic, the moon rose over smoldering rooftops, casting long shadows. In the distance, a group of American soldiers noticed them approaching. "Hey Brooks," one called. "You found yourself a little Jap family already?" "Jap lover?" another whistled mockingly. Isaiah kept walking, head high, feeling Aiko stiffen beside him. She might not understand the words, but hatred needed no translation. The clinic was quieter now, most of the day staff gone. A single bulb hung from a wire, casting harsh shadows across empty cots. 2 white medics played cards at a table, barely looking up when Isaiah entered with Aiko and Kenji. "What's this?" one asked, eyeing the Japanese woman and child. "Boy's got a broken arm and possible concussion," Isaiah replied. "Found them in collapsed housing." The medic shrugged. "We're not supposed to waste supplies on civilians. Colonel's orders." "I'll use my own kit," Isaiah said, his voice level. "Just need the space." "Your funeral." The medic returned to his cards. Keep them in the corner. Isaiah led Aiko to a small table in the far corner of the room. He laid Kenji on a blanket, noticing how Aiko stayed close, her eyes darting nervously around the unfamiliar space. Working methodically, Isaiah cleaned the boy's wounds with iodine, rebandaged the splint more properly, and prepared a small dose of fever medication. Aiko watched his every move, occasionally whispering to her unconscious son. "He'll be all right," Isaiah said softly, not caring if she understood. "Fever's the main concern now." Aiko nodded as if she had caught his meaning. She sat on the floor beside the makeshift bed, back straight despite her obvious exhaustion. Her clothes were worn but clean, her hands calloused but graceful. Isaiah wondered what her life had been before bombs remade her world. "Water," he said, miming drinking. "For you." He brought her a tin cup. She accepted it with both hands and a small bow, her eyes never leaving her son. Hours passed. The white medics left for the barracks, giving Isaiah suspicious glances. "Lock up when you're done with your patients," one said, emphasis making the last word an insult. Isaiah kept vigil with Aiko, checking Kenji's temperature every hour. Around midnight, the boy's fever began to break. His breathing deepened, color returning to his face. Aiko noticed the change immediately. She touched her son's forehead, then looked at Isaiah with eyes swimming in tears. Slowly, deliberately, she stood and bowed so low, her forehead nearly touched the floor. "Arigato," she whispered. "Arigato gozaimasu." The raw gratitude in her voice made Isaiah uncomfortable. He'd done what any decent person would do, what he'd been trained to do. He'd never thought of medicine as belonging to one side or another. "Just doing my job, ma'am," he said quietly. As if understanding, Aiko straightened and shook her head firmly. She touched her heart, then pointed to him, trying to convey something beyond words. The clinic door banged open. A white corporal stumbled in, clearly drunk. "Thought I saw lights in here," he slurred, then spotted Isaiah and Aiko. Well, well, what have we got? Fraternizing with the enemy, Brooks?" "Just treating a wounded child," Isaiah replied evenly. "Boy broke his arm." The corporal approached, swaying slightly. "Army regs say no unauthorized civilians after curfew." He spat on the floor near Isaiah's boots. "Especially not for your kind." Aiko drew back, pulling Kenji protectively closer. The movement caught the corporal's attention. "Pretty for a Jap, ain't she?" He reached toward Aiko's face. Isaiah stepped between them. "They're leaving now, sir. Boy's stable." The two men locked eyes. Something in Isaiah's steady gaze made the corporal back down. "Get them out then, and report to Miller tomorrow." He turned to leave, then added over his shoulder, "There's still the enemy, Brooks. Don't forget that." When he was gone, Isaiah exhaled slowly. Aiko had understood enough to look frightened. "You should go," Isaiah said, gesturing toward the door. "Not safe here." Aiko gathered Kenji into her arms. The boy stirred but didn't wake. At the door, she paused, turning back to Isaiah. "I bring food," she said in halting English. "Tomorrow. Thank you." Isaiah shook his head. "No need. Too dangerous for you." Aiko's chin lifted slightly, a flash of determination cutting through her usual deference. "I bring," she repeated firmly. "I owe." Before Isaiah could argue further, she slipped into the darkness, her small figure soon swallowed by night shadows. Isaiah watched until he couldn't see her anymore, then began cleaning up the clinic. He had a feeling Sergeant Miller would have plenty to say tomorrow. Morning in the barracks brought the usual sounds: men snoring, metal cups clanging on metal tables, boots scraping wooden floors. The smell of powdered eggs and wheat coffee filled the air. Isaiah sat alone, as usual. The few other soldiers in the unit had been assigned to different areas, and white soldiers rarely shared tables willingly. He'd grown used to the isolation, wearing it like an invisible uniform beneath his visible one. He was halfway through his breakfast when he noticed the whispers and glances. "That him?" "Yeah, the one patching up. Heard he spent the night with some woman and her kid." Sergeant Miller approached, coffee cup in hand, face thunderous. "Brooks, office, now." Isaiah followed him to a small room that had once been a supply closet. Miller closed the door and turned, arms crossed. Got a report you brought unauthorized civilians into the clinic last night. That true? Yes, sir. A boy with a broken arm and concussion, and his mother. And you stayed with them until midnight? The boy was in bad shape, sir. Needed monitoring. Miller leaned closer. We're not here to play wet nurse to these people, Brooks. They bombed Pearl Harbor. They tortured our boys in POW camps. They fought until we had to drop the big one on them. Now suddenly they're innocent victims? Isaiah met his gaze steadily. The boy is 7 years old, sir. He didn't bomb anyone. Don't get smart with me, Miller snapped. You're crossing lines, Brooks. Dangerous lines. We've got rules about fraternization. I was providing medical care, sir, same as I'd do for anyone. That's just it. You don't decide who gets care. Command does. Miller ran a hand through his thinning hair. Look, I know you medic types have your own code, but this isn't Alabama Baptist Hospital. This is occupied enemy territory. War's over, sir, Isaiah said quietly. Miller's face darkened. War's over when I say it's over, Private. He jabbed a finger at Isaiah's chest. No more unauthorized treatments, no more midnight house calls. You follow direct orders or you'll find yourself cleaning latrine for the rest of your tour. Clear? Yes, sir. Dismissed. Isaiah returned to the barracks, aware of the eyes following him. The atmosphere had thickened with hostility, like the air before a storm. He'd felt it before, in training camps down south, in field hospitals where white soldiers refused his help despite their wounds. The weight of being watched, judged, found wanting, before he'd even spoken. That night, he sat on his bunk and wrote a letter home by flashlight. Dear Mama, Yokohama is nothing but ruins now. Hard to imagine it was once a city filled with people going about their lives. The Japanese civilians look right through us, like we're ghosts. Can't blame them. We must seem like giants trampling through the remains of their world. Today I helped a young boy with a broken arm. His mother, Isaiah paused, considering what to say about Aiko. Something told him to be careful. He was grateful for the help. It reminded me of why I became a medic in the first place. To heal, not to harm. The other men don't understand. They still see enemies where I see patients. Maybe that makes me naive. Or maybe it just makes me your son, remembering what you taught me about judging each soul on its own merits. I miss home. Even with all its troubles, at least I understood where I stood. Here, everything shifts like sand. Your loving son, Isaiah. He sealed the envelope, knowing the censor would read it before it ever reached Alabama. Some words would be blacked out, anything that might suggest the occupation wasn't going smoothly. Isaiah wondered what would remain of his thoughts once they passed through that filter. When the letter came back from the censor's office days later, he found Aiko's name blacked out. He stared at the thick black line, wondering what stories were worth erasing. What connections were too dangerous to acknowledge. The afternoon sun beat down on the clinic's corrugated metal roof. Isaiah wiped sweat from his forehead as he inventoried medical supplies. 3 days had passed since he'd helped Kenji, and he'd heard nothing from Aiko. Perhaps she'd thought better of her promise to bring food. Perhaps someone had warned her to stay away from Americans, especially black ones. A shadow fell across the doorway. Isaiah looked up to see Aiko standing there, Kenji beside her, his arm properly bandaged. In her hands was a small cloth bundle. You came, Isaiah said, surprised. Aiko bowed slightly, then unwrapped the cloth to reveal rice cakes, carefully shaped and still warm. For you, she said. Thank you. Kenji stepped forward and copied his mother's bow, wincing slightly from the movement of his arm. Thank you, doctor, he said in careful English. Isaiah smiled. You're welcome, Kenji. He accepted the rice cakes with a small bow of his own. These look delicious. Through the window, he noticed several Japanese villagers watching nervously, as if expecting trouble. Aiko had taken a risk coming here, he realized. Please, eat, Aiko urged, gesturing to the rice cakes. Isaiah took a bite, the subtle flavor surprising him. It's very good, he said, nodding appreciatively. Aiko's face brightened. From her pocket, she produced a small jar. For pain, she explained, pointing to Kenji's arm. Japanese medicine. Isaiah examined the jar, sniffing its herbal contents. He recognized some of the components from his medical training, natural anti-inflammatories. "Thank you," he said. "This will help many people." Their exchange was observed by an elderly Japanese man who had been watching from a distance. As Isaiah accepted both the food and medicine with respect, the old man murmured something to those around him. "Kuro tenshi," Isaiah heard whispered among the small group of locals. "What does that mean?" he asked Aiko. A young Japanese man who had been working as a translator for the Americans approached. "They call you Black Angel," he explained quietly, "because you help when others turn away." Isaiah felt uncomfortable with the title. "Just doing my job." The translator shook his head. "Not job, choice." He gestured to the other Americans in the distance. "They have same job, different choices." Aiko nodded in agreement, her eyes conveying what words could not. Children who had been hiding behind adults began to inch closer, curious about this different kind of American. One small girl approached Isaiah and touched his hand quickly, as if testing whether his skin color would rub off. When it didn't, she giggled and ran back to her friends. The moment of connection was shattered by the sound of an approaching jeep. An American officer leaned out, shouting, "All unauthorized Japanese civilians, clear the area. Curfew in 1 hour." The locals scattered immediately, the instinct to avoid trouble deeply ingrained. Aiko gathered Kenji close, preparing to leave. "Arigato, Kuro tenshi," she said softly. Then, with unexpected emotion, she added in broken English, "Please, stay." Before Isaiah could respond, she was gone, melting into the crowd of retreating figures. The officer approached Isaiah. "Getting popular with the locals, Brooks?" "Just following orders to improve relations, sir," Isaiah replied carefully. "Well, don't get too friendly. Remember whose uniform you're wearing." The officer eyed the rice cakes. "And I wouldn't eat anything they give you. Could be poisoned." Isaiah said nothing, but when the officer left, he finished every bite of Aiko's gift. 3 days later, the army organized a food distribution in Yokohama's town square. Lines of Japanese civilians waited patiently for rations, their faces carefully neutral as American soldiers handed out packages of flour, powdered milk, and canned meat. Isaiah was assigned to help maintain order, a job usually given to regular infantry, not medics. Sergeant Miller had made the assignment with a smirk. "Since you're so good with the locals, Brooks." The day was hot, the square dusty. Many civilians had been waiting since dawn. Isaiah noticed Aiko and Kenji near the back of the line, unlikely to receive anything before supplies ran out. Without thinking about consequences, Isaiah approached them. "Come," he said, gesturing them forward. Aiko shook her head, pointing to their place in line. "Must wait." "Too long," Isaiah said, looking at Kenji's thin face. "The boy needs food." Before she could protest further, Isaiah lifted Kenji onto his shoulders. "Hold tight," he told the startled boy. "We'll get you to the front." Kenji's initial surprise gave way to a small, delighted laugh, perhaps his first since the war's end. Isaiah carried him toward the distribution table, Aiko following uncertainly. A Japanese photographer, documenting the occupation for a local newspaper, captured the moment. The tall black American soldier carrying a Japanese boy on his shoulders, the child's mother watching with a mixture of gratitude and apprehension, the son catching the white bandage on the boy's arm. "Private Brooks," a lieutenant called sharply, "what do you think you're doing?" Isaiah lowered Kenji carefully. "This boy has a medical condition, sir. Needs proper nutrition to heal." The lieutenant looked skeptical, but waved them through. "Make it quick." Isaiah helped Aiko collect a food package, aware of the stares from both Japanese civilians and American soldiers. The photographer took several more pictures. "Thank you," Aiko said as they moved away from the crowd. "But dangerous for you." "Worth it," Isaiah replied simply. That evening, the photograph appeared in a small local newspaper with a caption in Japanese characters. By morning, copies had spread throughout the district. Isaiah couldn't read the text, but he recognized his own face beside Aiko's and Kenji's. When he entered the mess hall for breakfast, an unusual hush fell over the room. Sergeant Miller burst in moments later, newspaper in hand. "Brooks!" he bellowed, slamming the paper onto Isaiah's table. "What the hell is this?" Isaiah looked down at the photograph. The headline, translated beneath in English, read, "The Black Angel of Yokohama." "I was helping a sick child, sir," Isaiah said quietly. "You've made us a goddamn circus act." Miller's face reddened. "Do you have any idea what this looks like? A Negro soldier playing hero to the enemy?" Several Japanese kitchen workers had stopped to watch, their eyes moving between Isaiah and the sergeant. "Report to Lieutenant Reynolds, now." Miller's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "You're in serious trouble, Brooks." As Isaiah stood to leave, he noticed the newspaper had been passed around the room. Some soldiers looked angry, others uncomfortable, a few thoughtful. One young private from Boston caught his eye and gave a barely perceptible nod of approval. Outside, Isaiah took a deep breath of morning air. The photograph had done something no words could have accomplished. It had made visible a reality many preferred to ignore. That healing could happen across the lines that war had drawn. That compassion didn't recognize uniforms or colors. But as he walked toward headquarters, Isaiah knew such revelations came with a price. And he was about to discover exactly how high that price would be. Lieutenant Reynolds' office had once been the school principal's room. A large map of Japan covered one wall, red pins marking American installations. The lieutenant himself sat behind a desk too small for his frame, making him look like an adult at a child's tea party. "Private Brooks," he said as Isaiah entered, "stand at attention." Isaiah complied, back straight, eyes forward, the newspaper photograph folded in his pocket like a hidden wound. Reynolds studied him for a long moment. He was different from Sergeant Miller. Quieter, more thoughtful, but no less dangerous for it. The kind of officer who followed rules precisely because he believed in them. "That photo is making rounds all the way to Tokyo," Reynolds finally said. "Command is not pleased." "I apologize for any trouble, sir." "Do you?" Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "I'm not sure you understand the situation, Brooks. We're occupying a defeated nation. Our job is to maintain order and authority while rebuilding, not to create personalities." Isaiah remained silent. "The Japanese are looking for symbols, Private. Heroes. Narratives that help them make sense of defeat." Reynolds tapped his desk. "You're becoming one of those symbols, the Black Angel. It undermines the occupation's chain of command." "I was just helping a child, sir." "No, you were making a statement, perhaps unconsciously, but a statement nonetheless." Reynolds stood, walking to the map. "Japan is at a crossroads. They've followed emperors and warlords for centuries. Now they're looking for new leaders, new ideas. We need to control that process." He turned back to Isaiah. "Your actions suggest division in our ranks. Different values, different approaches. It raises questions we don't want asked." The implication was clear enough. A black soldier showing compassion highlighted the lack of compassion from white soldiers. It exposed the hypocrisy of America's claim to moral superiority while maintaining its own racial hierarchies. "What would you have me do, sir?" Isaiah asked quietly. "Stay in your lane, Brooks. You're a medic. Treat who you're ordered to treat. Follow protocol." Reynolds' voice softened slightly. "I understand you have good intentions, but this isn't about you or that boy or his mother. It's about millions of people finding their way after surrender." He picked up a folder. "I'm issuing an official reprimand. One more incident, one more photograph, one more newspaper story, and I'll have you transferred to supply duty in Okinawa. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir." "And Brooks," Reynolds met his eyes directly, "stay away from that woman and her son. For their sake as well as yours. Fraternization creates complications. Outside, Sergeant Miller waited, a satisfied smirk on his face. As Isaiah passed, he heard the sergeant mutter under his breath, "Uppity Negro." Isaiah's hands curled into fists, but he kept walking, face impassive. He'd heard worse growing up in Alabama, where such words often came with violence. He'd learned to swallow rage like bitter medicine. Back in his quarters, Isaiah unfolded the newspaper. The photo showed him clearly, uniform crisp despite the dust, medical armband visible. Kenji perched on his shoulders with a small, surprised smile. Aiko stood nearby, her face a complex mixture of gratitude and fear. It was the truth, captured in a single moment. The unexpected connection between people divided by war, race, and language. Isaiah wondered why such truth frightened his superiors so much. Rain began to patter on the tin roof. Isaiah lay on his bunk, listening to its rhythm. The folded newspaper pressed against his heart like a reminder of something worth protecting. The rain intensified through the evening, drumming against windows and turning dirt roads to mud. Most soldiers stayed in the barracks, playing cards or writing letters home. Isaiah volunteered for night duty at the clinic, preferring solitude to the weighted silence that now followed him. The clinic was empty, except for supplies and shadows. Isaiah organized medicine cabinets by lamplight, the mundane task calming his mind. Outside, rain created a curtain of silver lines in the darkness. Just past midnight, movement near the base perimeter caught his eye. A small figure stood by the gate, holding an umbrella, seemingly waiting. Even through the rain, Isaiah recognized Aiko's straight-backed posture. He shouldn't go out. Reynolds' warning was still fresh. Yet something pulled him forward, not just concern, but a sense that moments of real connection were too rare to waste. Grabbing his poncho, Isaiah stepped into the downpour. The rain immediately soaked through his boots as he approached the gate. "Aiko," he called softly, "you shouldn't be here." She turned, water streaming down her face despite the umbrella. "I come to thank you. For food." Her English was still broken, but improving with each meeting. "And to apologize for picture. Caused trouble?" "Some," Isaiah admitted, "but not your fault." Aiko stepped closer to the fence. In the dim light from the guard post, her face looked tired but determined. "My people talk about you, Kuru Tenshi, not like other soldiers." Isaiah shook his head. "I'm just doing what's right." "No." Aiko's voice strengthened. "Not just. Many people can do right thing. Few people do." She reached through the fence, offering a small cloth pouch. "For you, protection." Isaiah hesitated, then accepted it. The pouch was hand-sewn from blue fabric, containing something small and hard. "What is it?" "Omamori, good luck charm." She pointed to the characters embroidered on it. "For protection, from temple." The gift felt weighted with meaning beyond its size. Isaiah tucked it carefully into his pocket. "Thank you." They stood in silence for a moment, rain filling the space between their words. Finally, Aiko spoke again. "Japanese women fear American soldiers," she said quietly. "Stories of bad things, but not fear you." She tapped her chest. "Heart can see." Isaiah wanted to explain the complexity of his position, how being black in America had taught him about power and its abuses, how seeing Japanese civilians reminded him of colored neighborhoods back home where people walked carefully to avoid white attention. Instead, he asked, "How is Kenji's arm?" "Better. He asked about you." Aiko's eyes softened. "Want to be doctor now?" Isaiah smiled. "Tell him to study hard." Thunder rumbled overhead. In the distance, a spotlight swept the perimeter, part of the routine security check. "You go," Isaiah said urgently. "Not safe here." Aiko nodded, understanding the danger. But before turning away, she reached through the fence again, her fingers briefly touching his hand. "Arigato, Isaiah-san." The spotlight swung toward them. "Who's there?" a white MP shouted. "Go," Isaiah whispered. Aiko disappeared into the darkness, her small figure swallowed by rain and night. Isaiah stood his ground as the MP approached. Brooks, what are you doing at the fence? Thought I saw someone, sir. Came to check. The MP looked skeptical. Locals know better than to approach the perimeter, especially at night. He shined his flashlight where Aiko had stood. You sure you weren't meeting someone? Just doing my rounds, sir. Get back to your post, Private. The MP made a note in his log. I'll report this. Isaiah nodded, knowing another mark had been added against him. As he walked back through the rain, his hand closed around Aiko's charm in his pocket. Some protections were visible, like uniforms and fences. Others worked in ways no military regulation could touch. Morning formation brought the expected consequences. Sergeant Miller read out the day's assignments with particular satisfaction when he reached Isaiah's name. Private Brooks reassigned to sanitation detail until further notice. A few soldiers snickered. Sanitation duty meant hauling waste barrels, burning refuse, and cleaning latrines. Work usually rotated among the lowest-ranking men. Being permanently assigned was a public humiliation. Yes, sir, Isaiah replied evenly. Report to the motor pool. Jackson will show you your new duties. The motor pool stank of diesel and garbage. Corporal Jackson, a weathered man with tobacco-stained teeth, pointed to a row of metal barrels. Load these on the truck. We dump them at the pit outside town. Jackson spat in the dust. Heard you're the Jap lover from the newspaper. Isaiah said nothing, focusing on the barrels. Don't get above yourself, boy, Jackson warned. This ain't the place for it. The day stretched endlessly, lifting, hauling, burning. The work itself didn't bother Isaiah. He'd done harder labor growing up. It was the eyes that weighed on him, the knowing smirks from soldiers passing by, the curious glances from Japanese civilians who recognized his face from the photograph. By afternoon, his uniform was stained with sweat and ash. He worked steadily at the burn pit, pushing refuse into the flames with a long metal pole. The fire threw shadows across his face, reminding him of evenings back home when his father would burn garden waste, telling stories as smoke curled toward the stars. A small group of Japanese civilians gathered at a distance, watching. Isaiah heard them whisper, "Kuro Tenshi," pointing discreetly in his direction. One elderly woman approached, bowing respectfully before offering him a ladle of water from a bucket she carried. Isaiah hesitated, aware of regulations against accepting anything from locals. "Thank you," he said finally, taking a careful sip. The water was cool and clean. Before the woman could retreat, a jeep roared up, 2 MPs inside. "No fraternization," one shouted, jumping out. "Get back!" The woman scurried away. Other civilians scattered like startled birds. "Brooks," the MP said, "you're on thin ice already. No contact with locals unless authorized." "She was just offering water, sir. Don't care if she was offering gold. Rules are rules." The MP returned to his jeep. Next time, it's the stockade. As the jeep pulled away, Isaiah noticed a barefoot Japanese boy lingering nearby. When their eyes met, the boy darted forward, slipped something into Isaiah's hand, and vanished before Isaiah could react. It was a folded note, written in careful, childish English. "From Aiko, thank you." Isaiah quickly tucked it into his pocket, his heart pounding. Such a simple message, yet its discovery could mean serious trouble for both him and Aiko. He worked until sunset, the note like a burning coal against his skin. That night, alone in his bunk, Isaiah read the note again by flashlight. Beneath the "thank you" was a small drawing, a bird flying over mountains. Freedom, perhaps, or hope. He tucked the paper inside Aiko's charm pouch and slid it under his mattress. Outside, in the compound, soldiers laughed and talked about home, about women waiting, about lives paused but not ended by war. Isaiah listened to their voices fade as sleep claimed them, wondering if any bridge could ever truly span the distance between their world and his, or between his world and Aiko's. A week passed. Isaiah continued his sanitation duties without complaint, earning reluctant respect even from Jackson. "At least you're not lazy," the corporal admitted one evening. The weather cooled as September gave way to October. Tree leaves turned crimson and gold in the undamaged parts of town. Occupation settled into routine: patrols, rations, rebuilding, paperwork. On a crisp morning, Lieutenant Reynolds called Isaiah to his office. Isaiah prepared for more reprimands, but found the lieutenant in an unusual mood. "The Japanese mayor has organized a small gathering," Reynolds explained. "A formal thank you to American troops for medical and food assistance. Colonel wants a representative showing of men, different ranks, different backgrounds." He hesitated on the last word, clearly meaning race. "You want me to attend, sir?" "Not my idea," Reynolds said quickly. "Colonel thinks it might smooth things over after that newspaper business. Show unity." Isaiah understood. He was to be displayed, proof that America's army included all colors, that democracy embraced diversity. The irony wasn't lost on him. "When is this event, sir?" "Tomorrow evening, Town Community Hall. Dress uniform." Reynolds studied him. "Stay in the background, Brooks. No speeches, no photographs. Just be present and polite." "Yes, sir." The community hall had once been grand: high ceilings, wooden floors, painted screens along the walls. Bombing had collapsed one corner, now covered with canvas. Candles and oil lamps provided soft light against the early evening darkness. Isaiah arrived with other selected soldiers, mostly officers, a few enlisted men chosen for good behavior or special skills. Sergeant Miller stood near the entrance, his expression souring when he spotted Isaiah. "Remember, you're representing the United States Army," Miller muttered as Isaiah passed. "Don't embarrass us." Inside, Japanese officials greeted American officers with formal bows. Local women in traditional kimono prepared food at long tables. The scents of fish, rice, and vegetables filled the air. Real food, not army rations. Isaiah stood to one side, observing. The careful choreography of occupier and occupied, the polite fiction that they met as equals, fascinated him. A familiar figure approached, Aiko, wearing a simple blue kimono. Her hair was arranged formally, making her look older, more dignified. She carried a tray of small cups. "Isaiah-san," she said softly, bowing. "You come?" "Official orders," he replied, surprised to see her. "You work here?" "I help Mayor, speak some English." She offered him a cup, Japanese tea. As Isaiah accepted it, he noticed how deliberately Aiko had sought him out first, before serving higher-ranking officers. The gesture wasn't lost on others. Several American soldiers watched with raised eyebrows. "You should serve the officers first," Isaiah warned quietly. Aiko met his eyes. "You helped us stand," she said simply, "when others watched us fall." The mayor called for attention, beginning a speech translated by a Japanese-American sergeant. Isaiah barely heard the words, aware only of Aiko moving among the guests, her eyes occasionally finding his across the room. Cameras flashed as officers shook hands with Japanese officials. A white captain leaned toward Lieutenant Reynolds, whispering loudly enough for Isaiah to hear, "Look at that, like she's proud of him." Reynolds frowned, beckoning Isaiah over. "Time to go, Brooks." "Sir, the event's not finished. Your part is." Reynolds' voice left no room for argument. "Report to barracks immediately." Outside, Miller waited by a jeep. "Quite the celebrity, aren't you? Even got your own personal servant in there." Isaiah's jaw tightened. "She's not a servant. She works for the mayor." "They're all servants now, Brooks. That's what losing a war means." Miller's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Don't forget which side you're on." As the jeep pulled away, Isaiah looked back at the glowing windows of the community hall. For a brief moment, he'd glimpsed something possible: respect across differences, healing after violence. Now the jeep carried him back to the reality of fences, orders, and divisions that neither side seemed ready to overcome. The barracks buzzed with new tension the following morning. Isaiah noticed immediately, conversations stopping when he approached, eyes following him with fresh hostility. In the latrine, he found the source: a crudely drawn poster showing a caricature of a black soldier embracing a Japanese woman. The caption read, "Guess they like dark meat too." Isaiah tore it down, but the damage was done. Somehow, his interactions with Aiko had become barracks gossip, twisted into something vulgar. "Hey, Brooks," a soldier called as Isaiah passed. "Heard Japanese girls prefer coloreds now. That true?" Others laughed. Isaiah kept walking, face expressionless. He'd learned long ago that responding only fed their satisfaction. At breakfast, Sergeant Miller made a point of sitting across from him. "Quite a stir you've caused," he said, stirring powdered eggs. "Rumor has it you've got yourself a Japanese girlfriend." "Just rumors, sir." "For your sake, better stay that way." Miller leaned closer. "Higher command is watching you, Brooks. One more incident, and you'll find yourself on the first transport home, with a dishonorable attached to your name." The threat wasn't idle, but dishonorable discharge would follow Isaiah forever, closing doors already barely open to colored veterans. "Understood, sir." Miller nodded, satisfied. "Good, because these people aren't our friends. They're conquered enemies, learning their place. Don't forget that." That afternoon, Isaiah spotted Aiko in the market area near the base, carrying a basket of vegetables. He almost approached her, then remembered Miller's warning. Instead, he watched from a distance, noticing how other Japanese civilians treated her, some bowing respectfully, others turning away with obvious disapproval. A group of young men passed her without acknowledgement, one spitting on the ground near her feet. Aiko's face remained composed, but her shoulders stiffened. Isaiah realized with sudden clarity. Aiko faced her own backlash. Her association with an American, especially a black American, marked her somehow. In helping Kenji, he might have made her life more difficult. That night, unable to sleep, Isaiah slipped out to the clinic, hoping work might clear his mind. The building stood dark and quiet, moonlight streaming through broken windows. As he approached, a shadow moved near the entrance. "Isaiah-san?" Aiko's voice came softly from the darkness. He stopped, heart pounding. "Aiko, what are you doing here?" She stepped into moonlight, her face pale with worry. "Need to talk. Someone throw rock." She held out a stone wrapped in paper. "Through window, with this." Isaiah unwrapped the paper. Written in Japanese characters, he couldn't read the message, but the hatred behind it needed no translation. "What does it say?" "Traitor to Japan," Aiko whispered, "for speaking to Americans." She didn't add, especially black Americans, but Isaiah heard the unspoken words. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "This is because of me." Aiko shook her head firmly. "My choice. I choose to thank man who saved my son." Her eyes flashed with unexpected fire. "I'm not sorry." Her courage humbled him. While he worried about military reprimands and barracks gossip, she faced deeper dangers. Community rejection, the label of traitor in a culture where belonging meant everything. "Where is Kenji?" he asked. "Neighbor, watch him. I come to warn you." Aiko looked over her shoulder. "Some men in village, very angry. Say Americans steal our honor. Say Japanese women who talk to soldiers are—" She struggled for the English word. "I understand," Isaiah said. He did, all too well. Women often bore the heaviest burden of war's aftermath, blamed for both resistance and accommodation. "You should go home," he told her. "It's not safe for you here." "Not safe at home, too," Aiko replied simply. Isaiah faced an impossible choice. Military regulations and self-preservation demanded he send her away. Humanity required he help. "Come," he finally said. "I'll walk you back." They moved through darkened streets, keeping to shadows. Yokohama after curfew was a ghost landscape. Bombed buildings casting monstrous silhouettes. Military patrols occasionally passing with flashlight beams sweeping the rubble. Aiko led the way through narrow alleys that had survived the bombing. Isaiah followed, constantly alert for MPs or hostile locals. Breaking curfew could mean arrest for both of them. "Here," Aiko finally whispered, stopping before a small traditional house at the edge of town. Unlike many surrounding buildings, it stood mostly intact, though its wooden walls leaned slightly. Inside, a single candle burned. The space was spare but clean. Tatami mats on the floor, a low table, a few cushions. A partition separated the main room from sleeping areas. Kenji lay curled under a thin blanket, his breathing soft and even. "Simple place," Aiko said, almost apologetically. "Before war, bigger house." "It's nice," Isaiah answered honestly. After barracks and tents, the humble home felt warm, personal. Aiko gestured to a cushion, then busied herself preparing tea. Isaiah sat awkwardly, too large for the low table, knees drawn up. He watched Aiko's practice movements, heating water, measuring leaves, all by candlelight. Her hands were graceful despite their roughness. "Your husband?" he asked cautiously. Aiko's movements paused briefly. "Dead, Okinawa." She said it simply, a fact like any other, though Isaiah caught the small tightening of her shoulders. "Soldier, like you." "I'm sorry." She nodded acknowledgement, continuing her preparations. Many dead, American, Japanese, all the same in end. The tea ceremony that followed had a ritual quality that transcended their circumstances. Aiko poured with precision, offering the cup with both hands. Isaiah mirrored her movements, accepting it with a small bow as he'd seen Japanese officials do. "Will you be punished?" Aiko asked suddenly. "For helping me?" Isaiah considered lying to ease her concern, but something about the candle's warm light demanded honesty. "Already am," he admitted. "Sanitation duty, warnings." Aiko looked down. "I bring trouble for you." "My choice," Isaiah said, echoing her earlier words. "I choose to help." They shared a small smile at the reversal. Outside, a military truck rumbled past, its headlights briefly illuminating the room through paper screens. Both froze until the sound faded. "You hide," Aiko whispered urgently, pointing to the partition. Isaiah slipped behind it, heart pounding as another vehicle stopped nearby. Through thin walls, he heard voices, an MP patrol checking for curfew violations. Aiko answered their questions calmly, claiming to be alone with her sleeping child. When they finally left, Isaiah emerged from hiding. "I should go." Aiko stood in the dim light, her face shadowed. "Not safe," she said. "Wait until moon lower." She was right. The full moon made the streets too bright for safe movement. Isaiah reluctantly agreed to wait another hour. Kenji stirred in his sleep, murmuring something. Aiko smoothed his forehead gently, whispering Japanese words that needed no translation, a mother's comfort transcending language. "He has your strength," Isaiah observed quietly. "He has father's face," Aiko replied. "But maybe my stubborn." She smiled faintly. "Like you." "Me? Stubborn?" "Yes. Help people even when told no. Very stubborn." Her voice held no criticism, only understanding. Isaiah found himself telling her about Alabama, about growing up colored in a town where drinking fountains and schools were segregated, about dreaming of becoming a doctor only to be told such dreams weren't for his kind, about joining the army as a medic, the closest he could get to his goal. Aiko listened intently. "In America," she said carefully, "you enemy too?" The question struck him like a physical blow, simple, devastating in its accuracy. "Not enemy," he answered slowly, "just not fully American." Always reminded of that. She nodded, understanding perfectly. Here, same. Woman always reminded. Place is small, voice smaller. They sat in silence, recognizing a shared truth beneath their obvious differences. Both knew what it meant to navigate worlds not made for them, to search for dignity where others granted only conditional acceptance. As the moon lowered, Isaiah stood to leave. Aiko pressed the small charm pouch into his hand again, now containing something new, a folded paper. "For safe journey," she said. Outside, the street lay silver and silent. Before departing, Isaiah turned back. "Aiko?" She waited in the doorway, a small, straight figure haloed by candlelight. "Stay safe," he said inadequately, feeling words fail before all he wished to express. "You also," she answered. Then, barely audible, "Please, stay." Isaiah carried those words with him through darkened streets, past patrols, back to the base. They echoed in his mind as he slipped into his bunk just before dawn. Not a request for him specifically to remain, but a larger plea. For kindness to stay, for humanity to remain when all else had been destroyed. In the privacy of pre-dawn darkness, he opened Aiko's note. Inside was a simple drawing of a bird flying between two shores. Beneath it, in careful English, "Not all bridges broken." 2 nights later, a harvest moon hung low over Yokohama. Casting long shadows across broken streets, Isaiah finished his sanitation duties as darkness fell. His back ached from hauling waste barrels all day, but the physical exhaustion felt almost cleansing. Simple pain with simple cause. He took a longer route back to barracks, avoiding the main road where MPs typically patrolled. The detour passed near the edge of the village where several Japanese women had volunteered as translators and kitchen helpers at the base. A scream cut through the evening quiet, sharp, quickly muffled, but unmistakable in its terror. Isaiah froze, listening. It came again, weaker this time, from a narrow alley between damaged buildings. Every instinct told him to keep walking. He'd been warned repeatedly about involvement with locals, yet his feet were already moving toward the sound. In the shadows between buildings, he found them, 2 American soldiers, drunk and laughing, pinning a Japanese woman against a wall. She struggled silently now, eyes wide with fear. Isaiah recognized her as one of the volunteers who had served tea at the gratitude gathering. "Hey!" He stepped into the alley. "Let her go." The soldiers turned, surprise giving way to sneering recognition. "Well, if it ain't the famous Black Angel," drawled the taller one, Corporal Davis from the motor pool. "Come to save another Jap?" "She works for the base," Isaiah said evenly. "Colonel won't be happy about this." The second soldier, Private Wilson, kept his grip on the woman's arm. "We're just having a friendly conversation, right, sweetheart?" He jerked her closer. "Let her go," Isaiah repeated, stepping forward. "Now." Davis moved to block him. "This ain't your business, Brooks. Unless you want these Japanese girls all to yourself." The woman's eyes met Isaiah's over Davis's shoulder, pleading, terrified. Something in them reminded him of his younger sister back home, of how she'd looked when white boys followed her after school, calling things no child should hear. "Last chance," Isaiah said quietly. "Walk away." Wilson laughed. "Or what? You'll report us? Who do you think they'll believe, us or you?" Isaiah didn't answer. Instead, he lunged forward, catching Davis off guard, and shoved him aside. In the same movement, he grabbed the woman's free arm and pulled her behind him. "Run," he told her. She hesitated only a second before darting away into the darkness. Davis recovered his balance, face contorted with rage and alcohol. "You just made a big mistake, boy." They came at him together. Isaiah managed to block the first few blows, his medic's knowledge of human anatomy serving him well. But they had numbers and weapons. Wilson swung his rifle like a club, catching Isaiah's shoulder. Pain exploded through his arm. Still, he fought. Not to win, but to survive long enough for them to tire of the sport. He landed a solid punch to Davis's jaw, sending the corporal stumbling backward. For a moment, victory seemed possible. Then something hard struck the back of his head, the butt of Wilson's rifle. Isaiah's vision blurred, knees buckling as he fell. Boots connected with his ribs, his back. He curled inward, protecting vital organs as his medical training had taught him. Through the pain, he heard new voices, MPs responding to the commotion. Flashlight beams cut through the alley. "What's going on here?" A sharp voice of authority. "Caught this Negro attacking us, sir," Davis said, suddenly sober-sounding. "Gone crazy talking about protecting Jap women." "That true, Brooks?" The MP shined the light directly into Isaiah's face. Isaiah tried to speak through swollen lips. "They were assaulting a volunteer." "Save it," the MP cut him off. "On your feet. You're under arrest." They dragged him upright. Through blurred vision, Isaiah saw a small figure at the end of the alley, the woman he'd saved, watching from a distance. Beyond her, another familiar silhouette appeared briefly before vanishing into shadow. Iko, arriving too late. As they led him away, Isaiah tasted blood in his mouth. Not just his own. He realized with grim satisfaction. Davis's split lip would need stitches. A small victory, purchased at great cost. Morning light filtered through a small barred window, waking Isaiah to renewed pain. Every breath sent fire through his ribs. His left eye had swollen shut, and dried blood crusted his temple where Wilson's rifle butt had struck. The cell was bare, concrete floor, metal cot, bucket in the corner. Military justice at its most basic. Outside, he heard guards changing shifts, their conversation drifting through the door. The colored medic from the newspaper. No kidding? The one they call Black Angel? Not looking so angelic now. Beat up 2 white boys defending some Jap girl. What did you expect? They let these people get ideas. Footsteps approached. The door swung open, revealing Lieutenant Reynolds with 2 MPs behind him. "Can you stand, Brooks?" Reynolds asked, his tone professionally neutral. Isaiah pushed himself upright, ignoring the stabbing pain in his side. Probably a cracked rib, his medic's mind noted clinically. Reynolds dismissed the guards, waiting until the door closed before speaking again. "You've created quite a problem." Isaiah said nothing, waiting. "Assaulting fellow soldiers is a court-martial offense," Reynolds continued, "especially during occupation duty." "They were attacking a Japanese volunteer," Isaiah said, his split lip making each word painful. "One of the women who works in the base kitchen." Reynolds sighed. "So you say. They claim you attacked them in a dispute over fraternization rights with local women." His expression showed distaste for the entire situation. "Given your history of involvement with civilians, their story has credibility." "Sir, with respect, they're lying." "Perhaps, but there's no witness to support your version." Reynolds paced the small cell. "And even if there were, what possessed you to handle it yourself rather than finding an MP?" The question hung in the air. Both men knew the answer. No MP would have acted on a colored soldier's report against white ones, especially over a Japanese woman. "I did what seemed right at the time, sir." Reynolds stopped pacing. "That's become your refrain, hasn't it, Brooks? Doing what seems right rather than what you're ordered to do." He shook his head. "Admirable in a civilian, dangerous in a soldier." He moved toward the door, then paused. "The MPs are confiscating your personal effects. Standard procedure for prisoners awaiting charges." Isaiah thought of Iko's charm, the hidden notes. "Yes, sir. I'll be frank, Brooks. Command wants this handled quietly. A public court-martial raises questions we'd prefer not to answer. About discipline, about relations with locals, about—" Reynolds hesitated, "about racial matters within our ranks." "What does that mean for me, sir?" "It means I'm working on an alternative. Disciplinary transfer, perhaps, back to a support role in the States." Reynolds studied him. "It's the best outcome you can hope for now." After the lieutenant left, Isaiah sank back onto the cot, pain throbbing through his body. In the quiet cell, he found himself humming softly, an old gospel tune his mother sang during hard times. The familiar melody brought some measure of comfort, a thread connecting him to home across thousands of miles. Hours passed. A guard brought water and hard bread. Isaiah drank gratefully, but couldn't stomach the food. Night fell, bringing cooler air through the window, and the distant sounds of the base settling into darkness. Just as he was drifting into uneasy sleep, the cell door opened quietly. Isaiah tensed, expecting more questioning. Instead, a small figure slipped inside. Aiko, wearing an oversized medic's coat, her hair hidden under a cap. How? Isaiah started to ask. Shh. She pressed a finger to her lips, eyes anxious as she glanced toward the door. Not much time. From beneath the coat, she produced a small bundle, antiseptic, clean bandages, a jar of her herbal medicine. Moving quickly, she knelt beside the cot and began cleaning the cut on his temple. You shouldn't be here, Isaiah whispered, even as he leaned into her gentle touch. They'll arrest you too. Already hear what happened, Aiko replied softly. Woman you saved, tell me, she afraid to speak to officers. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, applying medicine to his bruises. You protect her. Now I help you. The antiseptic stung, but Isaiah barely noticed, overwhelmed by her courage. Aiko, they catch you. I know. Her eyes met his, steady and determined. I already hurt, many ways. She continued working, binding his ribs with sure, gentle movements. Japan lose war. I lose husband. Son almost die. Then you help when no one help. Her simple words carried a weight beyond language, the recognition of shared humanity in a world determined to divide them. Thank you, Isaiah said inadequately. Aiko nodded, finishing her ministrations. She pressed a small jar into his hand. For pain, hide it. Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Aiko's head jerked toward the sound, eyes widening. Go, Isaiah urged, quickly. She gathered her supplies, hesitating at the last moment. In a gesture that seemed both impulsive and inevitable, she reached through the darkness, clasping Isaiah's hand briefly in hers. Their fingers interlaced for a heartbeat. Warm skin against warm skin. No uniforms or borders between them. I speak to Mayor, she whispered. He help clear your name. Before Isaiah could respond, she was gone, slipping through the door like a shadow. Seconds later, the guard's footsteps passed without pausing. He'd missed her by moments. Isaiah closed his eyes, his hand still warm where she had touched it. He tucked the medicine jar under his thin mattress, along with the blood-stained cloth she had used to clean his wounds. Small treasures in a barren place. Sleep came in fragments that night, broken by pain and troubled dreams. Isaiah woke to gray dawn light and the sound of rain against the small window. His body ached, but Aiko's medicine had reduced the swelling around his eye. The day passed slowly. Guards brought food and took it away, mostly untouched. A military doctor examined him briefly, noting his injuries without comment before departing. No one mentioned charges or hearings. By evening, the rain had intensified, drumming steadily on the roof. Isaiah sat on his cot, back against the wall, listening to its rhythm. The sound transported him momentarily to summer storms in Alabama, to his mother's porch, where they'd watch lightning flash across cotton fields. The cell door opened without warning. Lieutenant Reynolds entered, rain darkening his shoulders. You have a visitor, Brooks, he said, his expression unreadable. Against my better judgment, Aiko stepped in behind him, this time without disguise. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair pulled back neatly. Despite her composed appearance, Isaiah saw tension in her shoulders, in the way her hands clasped tightly before her. Reynolds watched them both with narrowed eyes. 5 minutes, he said curtly. I'll be right outside. The implied warning hung in the air as he withdrew, leaving the door ajar. For a moment, neither spoke. The cell seemed smaller with her in it, the air charged with unspoken words. You came back, Isaiah said finally, rising despite his pain. Aiko nodded. Mayor, speak to American commander. Tell truth about what happened. She kept her voice low, glancing toward the door. Woman you save, she speak too. Find courage. Hope flickered briefly. They believe her? Not sure, but questions now. Aiko moved closer, studying his injuries with concern. Medicine help? Yes, thank you. She reached into her pocket, producing a small package wrapped in cloth. Food, she whispered. Real food, not prison bread. Isaiah accepted it gratefully, their fingers brushing. The simple kindness, rice balls with pickled vegetables, he discovered later, nearly undid him. In this stark place, such ordinary humanity felt profound. "Why risk this?" he asked quietly. "Coming here. Helping me?" Aiko looked at him directly, her gaze steady despite the fear he knew she must feel. "Same reason you help woman in alley. Same reason you help Kenji." She touched her heart. Some things more important than rules. The simplicity of her answer humbled him. While he struggled with the conflicting loyalties of uniform and conscience, she saw only the essential choice, humanity or its absence. "They hurt you?" she asked, gesturing to his bruises. "I'll heal." She nodded, then reached out hesitantly, her fingertips just touching the bandage on his temple, the one she had applied the night before. The gesture held such tenderness that Isaiah found himself unable to speak. Outside, Reynolds cleared his throat loudly. Aiko stepped back, composing herself. "I must go." "Thank you," Isaiah said, meaning far more than the food or medicine. "For everything." She understood. With a small bow that somehow conveyed both respect and affection, she turned toward the door. "Aiko," Isaiah called softly. She paused, looking back. "Be careful," he said. "This could bring trouble for you too." Her smile was sad but determined. "I already know trouble. Before war, during war, after war. Always trouble for woman alone." She straightened her shoulders. "But now, I choose my trouble." With that, she was gone, the cell door closing firmly behind her. Isaiah heard Reynolds's voice in the corridor, then Aiko's softer reply, their words indistinct. Footsteps receded. He unwrapped the food she had brought, the simple meal more satisfying than any feast. As he ate, Isaiah realized something had shifted between them, something neither military regulations nor social boundaries could fully contain. Not romance exactly, but recognition. Two souls finding familiar music in each other despite the discord all around them. Later, as darkness filled the cell, Isaiah discovered Aiko had hidden something else in the food wrapper. A small folded paper crane, carefully crafted from what looked like a page from a child's notebook. Beneath it, in Kenji's uneven handwriting, "Get better soon, Angel-san." Isaiah placed the crane on his windowsill, where moonlight through the bars transformed it into a silver bird, poised for flight, waiting only for the right wind. The town square had been cleared of major debris, its stone center now used for public announcements and ration distributions. A cool October wind swirled dust in small eddies as villagers gathered, summoned by the mayor's officers. Aiko stood at the edge of the crowd, heart pounding beneath her calm exterior. 2 days had passed since her visit to Isaiah's cell. She'd heard nothing since, no news of charges dropped, no word of his condition. The mayor appeared on the makeshift platform, accompanied by 2 Japanese police officers who had been allowed to maintain order under American supervision. His face bore the carefully neutral expression of a man navigating impossible currents. "Citizens of Yokohama," he began in Japanese, "we gather to address a matter of community concern." Aiko felt eyes turning toward her even before her name was spoken. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Tanaka Aiko," the mayor called formally. "Step forward." Legs trembling slightly, Aiko moved through the parting crowd. Faces watched her passage, some sympathetic, many hostile, most carefully blank. She recognized the protective emptiness of expression that occupation had taught them all. From the corner of her eye, she spotted Kenji standing with their elderly neighbor, his small face confused and frightened. She gave him the smallest nod of reassurance before climbing the platform steps. The mayor spoke, without looking directly at her. "Recent incidents involving American occupation forces require clarification of proper behavior." Aiko understood immediately. To silence potential scandal that might embarrass both Japanese authorities and American command, she would be the sacrifice. A public example. Tanaka-san has been seen multiple times in unauthorized contact with American personnel, the mayor continued. Such behavior brings unwanted attention to our community during this sensitive transition. Shame burned through her, not for her actions, but for the public spectacle. Neighbors who had borrowed rice from her, friends who had celebrated her son's birth, all now stared as if she were a stranger. One of the police officers stepped forward. To maintain harmony, we must respect proper boundaries with occupation forces. Those who fail to observe these boundaries bring shame not only to themselves, but to all of Japan. His words carried the weight of official condemnation. Aiko kept her eyes forward, spine straight despite the crushing pressure. She had expected this from the moment she first brought food to Isaiah at the clinic, had accepted it as the price of following her conscience rather than convention. From the crowd, a man called out, "My daughter was killed by American bombs. Now this woman bows to them?" Others joined, voices rising. "Collaborator. No better than a comfort woman." Each accusation struck like physical blows, yet Aiko remained standing. These were her neighbors, traumatized by war, searching for somewhere to direct their pain and humiliation. She had become a convenient target. American soldiers watched from the periphery, some smirking at the scene. Sergeant Miller stood among them, satisfaction evident in his posture. The mayor raised his hands for silence. As punishment for bringing unwanted attention to our community, Tanaka Aiko will no longer receive priority rations. Her community standing is reduced accordingly. The practical consequences were severe: less food for her and Kenji, less protection in a time of scarcity. But it was the public rejection that cut deepest. In Japanese society, belonging was survival itself. The mayor prepared to dismiss the gathering, his duty discharged. But something rose in Aiko then, a clarity born of days watching Isaiah stand alone against much greater forces. "I wish to speak," she said, her voice carrying across the sudden silence. The mayor hesitated, clearly wishing to end the uncomfortable scene. "This matter is concluded, Tanaka-san. I have the right to answer accusations," Aiko insisted, louder now. All the strength she had hidden, as a woman in traditional Japan, as a widow in wartime, as a mother protecting her child in defeat, surfaced in this moment. Reluctantly, the mayor nodded. Aiko turned to face her community, trembling inside but outwardly composed. "I have heard your words," she began. "I understand your pain and anger. We have all suffered." She paused, gathering courage. "But I will not apologize for gratitude. This American you condemn saved my son when our own doctors had no medicine. He helped when no one else would help." Her voice strengthened. "He saved our children when no one else did." The words fell into profound silence. Even the American soldiers had stopped their mockery, watching with newfound attention. "Is this Japan now?" Aiko continued. "Where compassion is weakness? Where we forget our own values of honor and gratitude because they come wrapped in a different color skin?" An elderly woman in the crowd lowered her eyes. A man with a war-injured leg shifted uncomfortably. These were people who had also received medical help from Isaiah. People who had whispered "Kurotenshi" with hope rather than condemnation. "I accept your judgment," Aiko concluded, "but I keep my conscience." For a long moment, no one moved or spoke. Then, almost imperceptibly, the elderly woman bowed slightly in Aiko's direction. A tiny gesture of respect that risked community censure. Others remained hostile, their faces set in disapproval. But doubt had been introduced, cracks appearing in the united front of condemnation. The mayor, eager to conclude the uncomfortable scene, dismissed the gathering. As people dispersed, Aiko descended the platform steps, legs barely supporting her. Kenji ran to her side, taking her hand. "Why are they angry, Mother?" he asked as they walked home. Aiko considered how to explain the complex adult world to a child who saw only kindness or its absence. "Sometimes people are afraid of what they don't understand," she said finally. "Even good people. Like Isaiah-san, they don't understand him?" "Yes." She squeezed his small hand. "But you understand, don't you?" Kenji nodded solemnly. "He makes people better when they hurt, like you do." Such simple wisdom, Aiko thought. If only the world could see through a child's clear eyes. At the edge of town, she looked back toward the American base, visible on the hillside. Somewhere within those fences, Isaiah sat in a cell, perhaps hearing the echoes of her public shaming carried by the wind. She hoped he understood what she had tried to say, that his courage had awakened hers, that some connections ran deeper than nationality or circumstance. That night, as Kenji slept, Aiko knelt before the small family altar where her husband's photograph stood. "I have not dishonored you," she whispered. "I have only remembered the kindness you valued." Outside, rain began to fall, pattering against the roof. Weather reports warned of a typhoon approaching from the south. Nature's indifferent power about to sweep away human divisions, if only temporarily. Early October brought typhoon season to Japan. Isaiah listened to the wind rising throughout the day, rattling the cell's small window. Guards spoke in hushed tones about weather reports, a major storm approaching, possibly the worst since the war began. By evening, rain lashed horizontally, driven by howling winds. The cell grew damp as water seeped through cracks in the aging building. Isaiah moved his cot to the driest corner, though it made little difference. Sleep was impossible as the storm intensified, the building creaking and groaning like a ship at sea. Near midnight, shouting erupted in the corridors. Boots pounded past his door. Isaiah stood, pressing his ear against the cold metal. "Partial collapse at the main hospital. Evacuate the critical cases. All hands needed." The door swung open suddenly. Lieutenant Reynolds stood there, rain-soaked and grim. Behind him, chaos reigned, soldiers running with flashlights, orders being shouted over the storm's roar. "Brooks," Reynolds said tersely. "Hospital roof collapsed, casualties coming in. We need every medic." Isaiah straightened. "Sir?" Reynolds produced a key, unlocking the handcuffs Isaiah had worn since his arrest. "This doesn't change your situation, but right now, we need your skills more than we need you punished." "Yes, sir." Isaiah flexed his wrists, relief washing through him despite the gravity of the situation. Reynolds led him through corridors where water already pooled ankle-deep. Outside, the full fury of the typhoon became apparent. Wind bent trees horizontally, rain falling so heavily it seemed solid. Lightning flashed continuously, turning night briefly to blinding day. They fought their way to the field hospital. One section of the roof had indeed collapsed, exposing patients to the elements. Soldiers worked frantically to evacuate the wounded to the intact portion of the building. Isaiah plunged into the work without hesitation, his own injuries forgotten. He helped carry stretchers, stabilize patients, assess new wounds caused by falling debris. His medic's training took over, hands moving with practiced efficiency. "Brooks," a captain he didn't recognize, shouted over the storm. "We've got civilians incoming. Local building collapsed. Set up triage in the east corner." Isaiah nodded, gathering supplies. As he worked, he heard familiar voices outside, Japanese women organizing aid efforts, calling directions in their own language. Among them, unmistakably, was Aiko. She appeared in the doorway, drenched and mud-splattered, helping an elderly man with a head wound. When she spotted Isaiah, her eyes widened briefly before professional focus returned. They worked side by side without speaking, communication flowing through gesture and shared purpose. More locals arrived, victims of flooding and collapsed buildings. Some hesitated upon seeing American uniforms, but desperation overcame fear. Isaiah treated each person equally, his hands gentle despite the urgency, his voice calm even when he couldn't be understood. The storm worsened. Water began seeping under the hospital doors, rising steadily across the floor. An officer appeared, shouting above the wind, "We need to evacuate to higher ground. This whole area's flooding." Reynolds organized stretcher teams. "Brooks, take the east path to the hill compound. Move any patient who can walk." Isaiah gathered a group of walking wounded, both military and civilian. Aiko quickly joined him, bringing several Japanese women to help. Together, they led their charges into the storm. The wind nearly knocked them flat, rain reducing visibility to mere feet. Isaiah took the lead, Aiko bringing up the rear to ensure no one fell behind. The path turned into a muddy river, making each step treacherous. Halfway up the hill, a small Japanese child slipped from his mother's grasp, tumbling toward the rushing water below. Aiko moved without hesitation, diving after the child. Isaiah saw her disappear into the swirling darkness. Without thinking, he secured his group with other helpers and plunged down the slope. The water pulled at his legs, cold and powerful. Lightning flashed, momentarily illuminating Aiko's struggle. She had caught the child, but couldn't fight the current. Isaiah waded deeper, ignoring the danger, until he reached them. The child, a girl no more than 4, clung to Aiko with terrified strength. "I've got you," Isaiah shouted over the storm, one arm encircling them both. "Hold on." Together they battled back to higher ground, each step a victory against the typhoon's fury. When they finally reached the path, the child's mother fell to her knees in tearful gratitude, clutching her daughter. Isaiah turned to Aiko, both of them drenched and gasping. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, water streaming from her hair. "You came," she said, the simple statement holding a world of meaning. "Always," he replied, the word escaping before he could consider its weight. For one suspended moment, they stood together in the heart of the storm, the chaos around them receding. Then duty called them back, more wounded to move, more lives to save. They worked through the night, their previous separation forgotten in the urgent demands of the present. Even white soldiers who had mocked Isaiah now followed his directions without question. Japanese civilians who had shunned Aiko now accepted her help gratefully. By dawn, the typhoon's worst had passed. The sky lightened to gray rather than black, the wind diminishing to merely strong rather than devastating. Those who had survived gathered in the hillside compound, exhaustion erasing the usual boundaries between occupier and occupied. Isaiah found himself sitting on a muddy step beside Aiko, both too tired to move. His handcuffs lay broken and forgotten somewhere in the night's chaos. Her community censure seemed trivial against the night's shared struggle. "We did it," he said simply. "Yes." Aiko's voice was hoarse from shouting over the storm. "Together." As sunlight broke through distant clouds, reporters arrived, both American military journalists and Japanese newspaper photographers. They documented the aftermath, capturing images of destruction and rescue efforts. One photographer approached Isaiah and Aiko, his camera raised questioningly. Too exhausted to object, they remained as they were, side by side, muddy, injured, but unbroken. The shutter clicked, preserving the moment. Isaiah kneeling in the mud beside Aiko, both helping a wounded soldier drink from a canteen. Their faces showed nothing but compassion. No division, no history, only shared humanity in crisis. Neither knew then that this image would travel further than the first, becoming something neither military censors nor cultural prejudices could easily dismiss. The first day after the typhoon dawned clear and unnaturally quiet. Isaiah and Aiko, along with other volunteers, had worked through the night, moving between the hillside shelter and flooded districts where people remained stranded. They operated as a seamless team now, communication flowing between them with minimal words. Isaiah's medical knowledge complemented Aiko's understanding of local needs and customs. Together, they bridged gaps that neither could have crossed alone. By mid-morning, they led a group of local women carrying supplies to a neighborhood where several families remained trapped in second-floor rooms, lower levels completely flooded. "We need boats," Isaiah said, surveying the waist-deep water filling the street. Aiko spoke rapidly in Japanese to the women, who dispersed to search for anything that might float. They returned with wooden doors, storage chests, even large serving trays, makeshift rafts to transport supplies. Working methodically, they moved from building to building. Isaiah waded through the deeper sections, carrying children to dry ground. Aiko organized distribution of food and clean water, her quiet authority drawing cooperation from even those who had condemned her days earlier. Near noon, they reached a partially collapsed home where an elderly couple had been reported stranded. The structure creaked ominously as Isaiah approached. "Not safe," Aiko warned, grabbing his arm. "Building will fall." "They're still in there," Isaiah replied, pointing to movement behind a second-floor window. A Japanese rescue worker shook his head. "Too dangerous. We wait for building to settle." "They don't have that kind of time," Isaiah argued. He turned to Aiko. "Tell him I'm going in. I just need someone to secure a rope." Aiko's face showed her fear, but she translated without objection. Then, to Isaiah's surprise, she added, "I go too. I am smaller, can fit through spaces." "Aiko, no argue," she said firmly. "Two better than one." They secured ropes around their waists, with rescue workers anchoring the other ends. Isaiah tested the building's stability as best he could before helping Aiko climb to a broken section of wall where entry seemed possible. Inside, water had weakened the structure's foundations. Wooden beams groaned with each step. They moved carefully up a listing staircase, calling out in both English and Japanese. Faint responses guided them to a back room where the elderly couple huddled on a raised platform. The husband partially paralyzed from a previous stroke, the wife too small to move him alone. Both were cold and dehydrated, but alive. "We'll get you out," Isaiah assured them, though they likely didn't understand his words. Aiko translated, her voice calm, despite the danger surrounding them. Getting the husband out required improvisation. Using a door as a stretcher, they secured him with torn bedding. The challenge would be navigating the treacherous staircase while carrying his weight. As they prepared to move, a violent cracking sound came from below. The building shuddered. "Hurry," Aiko urged, "not much time." Step by painful step, they carried the man down the stairs, the wife following behind. Each movement sent tremors through the failing structure. Halfway down, a supporting beam splintered. Isaiah barely managed to hold the makeshift stretcher steady as the staircase tilted further. "Jump clear when we reach the water," he told Aiko. "Don't wait for me." She glared at him even as she adjusted her grip on the stretcher. Together or not at all. They reached the water-filled first floor, just as another section of ceiling collapsed behind them. With a final surge of effort, they waded toward the opening where rescuers waited. "Take him first," Isaiah called, lifting the stretcher toward reaching hands. The elderly man was pulled to safety, followed by his wife. As Aiko turned to follow, the floor beneath her gave way. She plunged into deeper water with a startled cry. Isaiah lunged after her, diving beneath the murky surface. Seconds stretched endlessly until his hands found her clothing. He pulled upward, both of them breaking the surface, gasping for air. "I've got you," he said, arms secure around her waist as he guided them toward the opening. Almost there, just as they reached safety, the remaining structure collapsed behind them, sending a wave of water and debris outward. They were pulled clear just in time, coughing and drenched but alive. On solid ground, they collapsed side by side, too exhausted to move. Aiko's hand found Isaiah's, fingers intertwining briefly in wordless acknowledgement. Japanese and American onlookers watched in stunned silence, the barriers between them momentarily forgotten in the face of such cooperation. Even the white soldiers who had previously mocked Isaiah now viewed him with reluctant respect. "You could have died," Aiko said quietly when she caught her breath. So could you, Isaiah replied. Worth it. She echoed his earlier words with a ghost of a smile. A group of reporters had gathered at the scene, both Japanese photographers and an American military journalist. One captured the moment perfectly. Isaiah and Aiko sitting in exhaustion, soaked to the skin, a Japanese elder cradling their hands in gratitude. Later, as they continued their rescue efforts, word of their actions spread through both communities. Japanese civilians began approaching Isaiah directly for medical help, bowing respectfully before speaking. American soldiers, seeing his effectiveness with the local population, deferred to his knowledge about neighborhood layouts and needs. By evening, they had helped establish a proper aid station in the remains of the town hall. Lieutenant Reynolds appeared, observing Isaiah. Her statement corroborates your account of what happened in the alley. Isaiah waited, hardly daring to hope. Given that and your service during this emergency, Reynolds cleared his throat awkwardly. The charges are suspended pending review. You're confined to base but no longer under arrest. Thank you, sir. Reynolds studied him. This doesn't erase the larger issues, Brooks. Your associations still concern command. Isaiah understood the implication. Its connection with Aiko remained problematic for the occupation's carefully maintained hierarchies. Your handcuffs are missing, Reynolds added. Lost in the rescue operation, sir, when we evacuated the hospital. Reynolds nodded, choosing not to pursue the matter. Report to medical tomorrow. Resume your duties as a medic. He turned to leave, then paused. What you did today, you and the Japanese woman, it was good work. The acknowledgement, small as it was, represented a shift. Not acceptance, not endorsement, but recognition of common humanity that transcended uniform and nationality. As night fell, Isaiah found Aiko distributing blankets to families sheltering in the town hall. She looked up as he approached, a question in her eyes. I'm no longer under arrest, he told her. Back to medical duties tomorrow. Relief washed over her face. Good, they see truth finally. Some of it, Isaiah replied. Not all. They both understood that the storm had merely pressed pause on larger conflicts. When waters receded and buildings were rebuilt, old prejudices would likely resurface. But today, we help people, Aiko said simply. Together. This is truth also, Isaiah nodded. In the chaos of the typhoon's aftermath, they had glimpsed possibility. Japanese and Americans working side by side, color and nationality secondary to shared purpose. Whether that vision could survive the return to normal remained uncertain. But as they continued their work into the night, moving among those who needed help without regard to uniform or language, Isaiah felt something he hadn't experienced since arriving in Japan. Hope. Not naive optimism, but the stubborn belief that connections made in crisis might leave lasting marks on hearts previously closed. The typhoon had broken more than buildings. It had, however briefly, shattered illusions of separation upon which both occupation and prejudice depended. Morning light filtered through broken clouds, illuminating a changed landscape. The typhoon had reshaped Yokohama overnight. Buildings reduced to rubble, streets transformed into canals, familiar landmarks erased. Yet amid destruction, new patterns emerged. Americans and Japanese working side by side, passing sandbags down human chains, sharing water rations, tending wounds without regard to uniform or language. Isaiah stood in the base courtyard, helping unload medical supplies from a truck that had made it through the flooded roads. His body ached from the previous day's rescue efforts, but the physical pain seemed distant, overshadowed by a strange sense of purpose. For the first time since arriving in Japan, he felt he was doing exactly what he had been meant to do. Aiko appeared at the edge of the courtyard, directing a group of Japanese women carrying food for the relief effort. Though they had parted only hours earlier, Isaiah felt a surge of relief seeing her safe, upright, continuing despite exhaustion evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. She nodded in his direction, a small acknowledgement that carried volumes of shared experience. No longer did they need words to communicate. The typhoon had forged something between them that transcended language. "Brooks," a corpsman called. "Lieutenant needs these antibiotics at the main shelter." Isaiah gathered the precious medicines, starting across the courtyard. Aiko met him halfway, their paths crossing naturally, like streams joining. "More people coming from South District," she told him. "Many injuries." "I'll bring extra bandages," he replied. They stood for a moment in the morning light, two figures amid the ordered chaos of relief efforts. One in a mud-stained American uniform, the other in a simple Japanese dress now torn and dirty. Different in every visible way, yet united by something invisible, but no less real. Neither noticed the Japanese photographer until the camera clicked. He had captured them perfectly, Isaiah kneeling to reorganize his medical kit, Aiko beside him passing bandages, both focused on the wounded soldier waiting nearby. Their faces showed only compassion. No division, no history, only shared humanity. "Sumimasen," the photographer said, bowing slightly. "Important moment, show working together." Isaiah understood enough to nod agreement. Aiko spoke briefly to the man in Japanese, her expression serious. "He say this picture show real story," she translated. "Not just American helping Japanese, or Japanese helping American. Show people helping people." The photographer took several more images, their hands working together to bandage a child's arm, their silhouettes against the morning sun as they carried supplies. Each frame captured something authorities on both sides had tried to prevent. Genuine connection across the barriers war had erected. "What newspaper?" Isaiah asked. Aiko relayed the question. "Mainichi Shimbun," she answered. "Big paper in Tokyo. Many people will see." Isaiah wondered how military command would respond to these images. The previous photograph, him carrying Kenji, had brought reprimand and suspicion. These new ones went further, suggesting partnership rather than charity, equality rather than occupation. He didn't have to wait long to find out. By mid-afternoon, Lieutenant Reynolds appeared at the aid station, face tight with controlled anger. "Brooks," he said tersely. "A word." Isaiah followed him outside where they wouldn't be overheard. "There's a Japanese photographer showing pictures around town," Reynolds said without preamble. "Pictures of you and that woman, Tanaka, working together during rescue operations." "Yes, sir. We helped evacuate the flooded district together." "These images are problematic, Brooks. They're being distributed without military approval or censorship review." Reynolds lowered his voice. "Command is concerned about the narrative they create." "What narrative is that, sir?" Isaiah asked, though he knew the answer. "One that undermines the chain of command. One that suggests fraternization and equality rather than proper occupation protocols." Reynolds sighed, looking suddenly tired. "I've been ordered to confiscate the negatives and any prints already made." Isaiah said nothing, understanding the futility of protest. "This isn't personal," Reynolds added, almost apologetically. "But there are larger considerations at work here. The occupation has specific objectives, political, strategic. Public opinion must be carefully managed, both here and at home." Within an hour, MPs located the photographer. Isaiah watched from a distance as they confiscated his camera and film rolls. The man protested, but eventually surrendered his equipment, bowing stiffly to the Americans. Lieutenant Reynolds personally supervised the disposal of the negatives, burning them in a metal trash can in the base courtyard. He instructed Isaiah to witness the destruction, perhaps as warning, perhaps as proof that the matter had been handled. Isaiah watched the flames consume the celluloid, images of connection and cooperation reduced to ash. The smell of burning chemicals stung his nostrils, acrid and final. "It's done," Reynolds said. "Consider this matter closed." But as Isaiah turned to leave, he noticed the photographer's young assistant standing at a distance, watching the scene with careful, blank eyes. Something in the young man's posture suggested this might not be the end of the story, that images, like truth, had a way of surviving despite efforts to erase them. 1 week passed, then another. Yokohama slowly emerged from the typhoon's destruction. Buildings were patched, streets cleared, normal routines tentatively resumed. The extraordinary cooperation of the disaster's immediate aftermath faded as occupation protocols reasserted themselves. Separate lines at ration distributions, enforced curfews, restricted movement. Isaiah returned to his medical duties, no longer under arrest but still watched carefully. Though no new charges had been filed regarding the alley incident, the cloud of suspicion lingered. He worked quietly, treating whoever needed help, avoiding unnecessary attention. He hadn't seen Aiko since the day the photographs were destroyed. Whether by choice or circumstance, their paths no longer crossed. Sometimes he thought he glimpsed her in the distance at food distributions, but she would disappear into the crowd before he could be certain. On a clear October morning, Sergeant Miller approached Isaiah at the clinic. For once, the sergeant's usual hostility seemed muted, replaced by something almost like regret. "You're being repatriated, Brooks," Miller said without preamble. "Orders came down this morning, disciplinary transfer back to the States." Though not entirely unexpected, the news still struck hard. "When?" "Transport ship leaves Yokohama Harbor tomorrow at 0800. Miller handed him a folder of papers. "Your orders and travel documents." Isaiah took the folder, its weight seemingly disproportionate to the few pages inside. "Charges?" Miller shook his head. "Administrative transfer. No formal charges, but a note in your record about adjustment difficulties in occupation context. Nothing that'll follow you too badly if you keep your nose clean back home." The absence of formal charges was surprising, almost generous by military standards. Isaiah wondered what had changed. As if reading his thoughts, Miller added reluctantly, "The locals raised a petition, sent it up through official channels to the colonel, signed by the mayor and about 50 civilians, mostly people you helped during the typhoon." Isaiah looked up sharply. "A petition? For what?" "For your release and continued service here." Miller seemed uncomfortable with the admission. "Said you were essential to community relations and medical care. Even that woman and her kid signed it. Tanaka." Aiko had been working behind the scenes, Isaiah realized. Despite the risks to her already precarious standing, she had organized support for him. The knowledge warmed something deep inside him, even as the reality of departure chilled the surface. "Didn't change the outcome," Miller continued, "but might have softened it. No dishonorable, just a transfer. Thank you for telling me, Sergeant." Miller nodded stiffly. "You've got until 1800 to pack and process out. Report to the harbor at 0700 tomorrow." He turned to leave, then hesitated. "For what it's worth, Brooks, what you did during the typhoon, it was good work. Not many would have gone into that water after civilians." The unexpected acknowledgement hung in the air as Miller departed. It wasn't friendship or equality, but it was something, a small crack in a wall previously solid. Isaiah spent the afternoon packing his few possessions and completing departure paperwork. As sunset approached, he walked to the edge of the base, hoping against reason that Aiko might somehow know to meet him there. The fence stood between them, literal and figurative, separating worlds that had briefly, imperfectly touched during the storm. As darkness fell, he turned to leave, resignation settling over him like a physical weight. Then, a voice called softly from shadows beyond the fence. "Isaiah-san." Aiko stepped into view, Kenji beside her. They had been waiting, perhaps for hours. "I heard you're leaving," she said simply. "Tomorrow morning," Isaiah confirmed. "How did you know?" "Mayor tell me. He's sad to see you go." She gestured to the petition he now knew about. "We try. Not enough." It meant something, Isaiah assured her. They could have court-martialed me. Instead, just transfer. Kenji stepped forward, offering a carefully folded paper crane through the fence wire. "For good journey," he said in his improving English. Isaiah accepted it gently. "Thank you, Kenji. Take care of your mother." The boy nodded solemnly. "I remember, Black Angel. Tell others." Aiko touched her son's shoulder. "Kenji, wait there." She pointed to a spot a few yards away, giving them a moment of privacy. When the boy was out of earshot, Aiko reached through the fence, passing Isaiah a folded letter. "For you, read on ship." Their fingers brushed during the exchange, the brief contact conveying more than words could express. "Will you be all right?" Isaiah asked. "After the petition, after everything, will there be trouble for you?" Aiko shook her head. "Typhoon changed things. People see differently now." A small smile touched her lips. Not all, but enough. The distant sound of an approaching patrol reminded them of limited time. "I should go," Isaiah said reluctantly. "Yes." Aiko straightened her shoulders, composing herself. "Good journey, Isaiah-san." She bowed deeply, not the bow of the occupied to the occupier, but the gesture of one equal to another, honoring shared humanity. As she rose, she spoke 3 English words that contained volumes. "You gave hope." Before Isaiah could respond, she gathered Kenji and melted into darkness. The patrol passed without noticing the exchange. Dawn brought low clouds and light rain, fitting weather for departures. Isaiah boarded the transport truck, with other soldiers being rotated home, his medical kit and duffel containing everything he would take from Japan. Aiko's letter remained unopened, tucked safely in his breast pocket, close to his heart. At the harbor, a gray transport ship waited, its metal bulk promising passage back to an America that now seemed distant in more ways than geography. Isaiah stood on deck as the ship's horn sounded departure, scanning the crowd of dock workers and officials. At first, he saw no one he recognized. Then, at the very edge of the dock, 2 figures appeared, Aiko and Kenji, standing straight despite the rain. They didn't wave or call out. Such obvious connections still carried risk, but their presence spoke volumes. As the ship pulled away, Isaiah watched them grow smaller. 2 straight-backed figures gradually rendered indistinct by distance and rain until they disappeared entirely into the misty grayness where sea met sky. Only then did he reach for Aiko's letter, opening it carefully with hands that trembled slightly. Inside, written in careful English that must have taken hours to compose, were words that would sustain him across an ocean and through the challenges awaiting his return. Not all bridges broken. Some invisible, stronger than steel. Memory makes bridge. Kindness makes bridge. Truth makes strongest bridge. Safe journey, Kurotenshi. Your light remains here. The hospital corridors in Birmingham, Alabama, gleamed under fluorescent lights. Everything clean, ordered, modern, after the makeshift clinics of war. Isaiah moved efficiently between rooms, pushing a cart of supplies, nodding politely to white nurses who barely acknowledged his presence. 5 months had passed since his return from Japan. The transition had been jarring, from combat medic making life and death decisions to hospital orderly forbidden to touch white patients. The Army had arranged the position through a veterans program, presenting it as an opportunity rather than the demotion it clearly was. "Brooks," the white supervisor called from the nurses' station. "Room 312 needs cleanup. Patient discharged." "Yes, sir. Right away," Isaiah replied automatically. As he wheeled his cart toward the elevator, he passed the colored waiting area, a narrow bench in a side hallway, separate from the spacious waiting room for white patients. A young mother sat there, trying to quiet a feverish child. Isaiah paused, medical instinct overriding workplace protocol. "How long has he been like this?" he asked quietly. The woman looked up, surprised to be addressed. "Since yesterday. Doctor says we wait our turn." Isaiah glanced at the child's flushed face, recognizing symptoms that required prompt attention. Without thinking, he reached into his pocket and produced a small packet of fever powder, medicine he'd begun carrying for such encounters. "Mix this with water," he instructed, voice low. "It will help until the doctor sees him." The woman accepted it gratefully. Thank you. Are you a doctor? No, ma'am. Just an orderly. Isaiah didn't elaborate on his combat medical experience or the lives he'd saved on battlefield and in typhoon. That history had no place here, where his knowledge existed in a curious limbo, acknowledged when convenient, denied when it might challenge hierarchy. That evening, in his small rented room on the city's colored side, Isaiah sat at a battered desk and continued his latest letter to Aiko. Writing had become his sanctuary, a space where distance collapsed and contradictions could be honestly examined. February 15th, 1946. Dear Aiko, winter lingers here, though nothing like the cold you described in your last letter. I think often of Kenji and hope his cough has improved with the medicine the missionary brought. Today I was reminded again of the strange ironies of coming home to freedom. I treated a child in secret because rules prevent me from using my training openly. The hospital administrator speaks of progress. They now allow colored orderlies on all floors, while keeping separate water fountains in the basement. You asked about my plans for medical school. The GI Bill would cover tuition, but only 2 medical schools in the South accept Negro students, and competition is fierce. I've applied to Howard University in Washington, where opportunities are better, but moving north means leaving my family when they need me most. Sometimes I find myself missing Yokohama, not the destruction or hardship, but the strange clarity of our time there. In crisis, pretense fell away. People were simply people, suffering, helping, connecting across lines others had drawn for us. Here, those lines are everywhere, invisible but solid as concrete. Colored and white signs mark every door, every fountain, every waiting room. I move between worlds daily, recognized as a veteran in our neighborhood, invisible in white spaces unless something needs cleaning. Yesterday, a white doctor stopped me in the corridor. He'd served in the Pacific and recognized my combat medic pins. For 5 minutes, we spoke as equals, sharing experiences of battlefield medicine. Then a hospital administrator passed, and I became instantly boy, again in his eyes. The transition was so practiced, so smooth, he likely didn't even notice it. I tell you these things not to burden you with troubles you cannot solve, but because you are perhaps the only person who might fully understand. You who lived under occupation, yet maintained dignity. You who faced community judgment, yet stood by truth. Your last letter mentioned the rebuilding in Yokohama and Kenji's progress in school. I was glad to hear the mayor acknowledged your work during the typhoon, with a community service recognition. Small justice, but justice nonetheless. I keep your charm close always. The crane Kenji made sits on my windowsill, catching morning light. With deepest respect, Isaiah. He sealed the envelope, addressing it carefully to the missionary outpost that had agreed to forward mail to Aiko. Communication remained difficult. Letters took weeks to cross the ocean, and many never arrived at all. But knowing his words might eventually reach her gave purpose to observations that would otherwise remain unspoken. Isaiah had sent his first letter 3 weeks after returning to America. It had taken nearly 2 months before Aiko's reply arrived. Her English improved, but still beautifully direct. Describing Yokohama's slow recovery, Kenji's school achievements, her new job as a translator for reconstruction projects. Their correspondence continued monthly, a tenuous bridge across vast distance. Isaiah described his struggles and small victories in the segregated South. Aiko wrote of Japan's painful transition, of food shortages and political uncertainty, but also of cherry blossoms returning to parks once used for military drills. Neither mentioned the deeper feelings that sometimes surfaced between the carefully penned lines. Their connection existed in a space beyond conventional definition. Not romance exactly, but profound recognition of kindred spirits, separated by circumstance, yet united in understanding. The missionary who forwarded their letters, a kind-eyed woman who had served in Japan for 20 years before the war, once asked Isaiah why he maintained this difficult correspondence. "Some connections," he had answered simply, "teach us who we might become if the world were different." Now, as he placed the sealed letter on his dresser for mailing tomorrow, Isaiah glanced at the paper crane catching moonlight on his windowsill. Some days, the distance seemed unbridgeable, not just physical miles, but the weight of systems designed to separate people like himself and Aiko. Other days, like today, he felt the truth of her words. Not all bridges broken, some invisible, stronger than steel. Yokohama, 1947. Aiko knelt in her small garden, coaxing vegetables from soil once filled with ash and debris. 2 years had passed since the typhoon. Yokohama had been rebuilt, not to its pre-war grandeur, but to functional stability. New buildings stood alongside repaired ones. Streets followed familiar patterns while accommodating modern needs. At 33, Aiko had found unexpected purpose in post-war Japan. Her English skills, improved through correspondence with Isaiah, had secured her work with Reconstruction authorities. As American occupation shifted from military control toward rebuilding, women like herself, widowed, educated, adaptable, found opportunities previously unimaginable. "Mother," Kenji called, running through the garden gate. At 9, he had grown tall and confident, the sickly child of occupation days, now a studious boy with curious eyes. "Someone asking for you at the community center." Aiko brushed dirt from her hands. "Who is it?" "A photographer, the one from the typhoon." Kenji's excitement was palpable. "He says he has something important to show you." Part quickening, Aiko followed her son through streets now lined with small shops and food stalls. The community center, once a relief station during the typhoon, had become a hub for local governance and cultural activities. Inside, she found Hiroshi Tanaka, no relation, the photographer whose camera and negatives had been confiscated 2 years earlier. He had continued his profession after the incident, documenting Japan's recovery for various newspapers. "Tanaka-san." Aiko greeted him with a bow. "My son says you wish to see me?" The photographer nodded, eyes bright with suppressed excitement. "I have something you should see, something I thought was lost forever." From a leather case, he carefully withdrew a photograph, not a newspaper clipping, but a properly developed print on quality paper. Aiko's breath caught as the image became clear. It showed Isaiah kneeling beside her in the aftermath of the typhoon, both of them tending to a wounded soldier. Their faces captured in perfect profile, one Black American, one Japanese, working together in complete harmony. The morning light had created a luminous quality, almost like a painting rather than a documentary image. But how? Aiko touched the photograph with trembling fingers. "The Americans took all the pictures, burned them." Hiroshi smiled. "Not all. My assistant Kenji, yes, same name as your son. He hid one negative, slipped it into his shoe while the soldiers searched our equipment." His voice lowered. "He kept it hidden until recently, when occupation rules relaxed about publishing." Aiko studied the image, memories flooding back, Isaiah's steady hands, his calm voice in crisis, their wordless coordination as they moved through the devastation together. "I've made a few copies," Hiroshi continued. "This one is for you." "Thank you," Aiko whispered, still transfixed by the photograph. "Does anyone else know about this?" "I showed it to several newspaper editors last week. They found it powerful. The Asahi Shimbun wants to publish it in a special feature about the occupation period." Aiko looked up sharply. "Is that permitted now?" "With proper context, yes. The American censors have relaxed somewhat. They allow historical documentation if it doesn't criticize occupation directly. Hiroshi smiled slightly. This image criticizes nothing. It simply shows truth. That evening, after Kenji had gone to bed, Aiko sat alone with the photograph in the soft light of a single lamp. She traced its edges carefully, remembering details the image couldn't capture: the smell of rain and mud, the exhaustion in Isaiah's eyes despite his determined focus, the way their hands had briefly clasped after the rescue. From her writing desk, she retrieved a wooden box containing Isaiah's letters, dozen now, arriving every few weeks through the missionary connection. His most recent had described his acceptance to Howard University Medical School, his difficult decision to move north, leaving family behind to pursue the dream they had encouraged, despite its cost. She placed the photograph alongside the letters, two forms of evidence that connections could form across supposedly uncrossable divides. Tomorrow, she would write to Isaiah about the image's survival, another small victory against forces that sought to control which stories could be told. For now, she simply looked, allowing herself to remember not just the crisis they had weathered together, but the quiet moments between emergencies when recognition had deepened into something neither had fully named. "Kenji was right about you," she whispered to the image of Isaiah, kneeling in the mud. "Some angels don't need wings to lift people up." Outside, cherry trees prepared for another season of blossoming, their cycle of renewal continuing regardless of human conflicts or connections. Aiko closed the box carefully, but left the photograph out where morning light would find it. Tokyo, 1963. Cherry blossoms drifted like pink snow across university courtyards. Kenji Tanaka, now a medical student at Tokyo University, walked briskly through the main gate, medical textbooks tucked under his arm. At 25, he carried himself with quiet confidence, his mother's determination evident in his steady gaze, his path shaped by memories of kindness during occupation. "Tanaka!" a classmate called, waving from a bench where several students gathered. "Come join us. The Americans are asking about occupation experiences." Kenji approached the group where two visiting American journalists sat with notebooks open. They had been interviewing Japanese students about changing attitudes toward the United States in the years since occupation ended. "This is Tanaka Kenji," his classmate introduced him. "His story is different from ours. He actually remembers the occupation." The older journalist, a man with graying temples, looked up with interest. "You would have been very young." 7 when it ended, Kenji confirmed, "but some memories stay clear no matter how young you are." "What do you remember most?" the younger journalist asked. Kenji paused, considering. Most students shared stories of candy from American soldiers or frightening first encounters with foreigners, surface memories that revealed little about deeper currents. "May I show you something?" he asked instead. From his worn leather satchel, Kenji withdrew a protective folder. Inside was the photograph that had lived on his mother's writing desk for 16 years, Isaiah and Aiko during the typhoon rescue. Though Kenji had seen it countless times, it still moved him, this evidence of connection across supposedly unbridgeable divides. The journalists leaned forward, immediately recognizing the image's power. "Where did you get this?" the older one asked. "The man beside my mother saved my life when I was 7, Kenji explained. "An American medic, Black American, who helped when others turned away." As the journalists took notes, Kenji shared the story no history book told, of the Black Angel of Yokohama, of courage that defied military hierarchy and cultural barriers, of his mother standing firm against community judgment. They both paid prices for their humanity, he concluded. Him with military punishment, her with community shunning. But they showed a different path was possible, even then. The younger journalist studied the photograph intently. "May we make a copy? This tells a story Americans need to hear, especially now, with civil rights movements challenging segregation back home." Kenji hesitated. The photograph was precious, one of few tangible connections to events that had shaped his life's direction toward medicine. My mother corresponds still with Dr. Brooks, he said finally. He practices medicine in Chicago now. I should ask her permission before this becomes public in America. Dr. Brooks? The older journalist looked up sharply. The medic became a doctor? Kenji nodded. Howard University Medical School. Then, residency at a Chicago hospital that serves mostly colored communities. He used the outdated term, translating directly from his mother's letters. He writes that things are changing in America, but slowly. Too slowly for justice. The journalists exchanged glances, recognizing the story's significance against the backdrop of America's ongoing struggle with racial equality. The Birmingham protests, Martin Luther King's rising voice, resistance and violence in the South. Please ask your mother, the older journalist said. This photograph shows something powerful. That connection across differences isn't just idealism. It happened, even in the worst circumstances. Later that evening, Kenji wrote to his mother, now working as an interpreter in Kyoto. He described the journalists' interest, their request to publish the photograph internationally. They say Americans need to see this now, he wrote. To remember that even during occupation, humanity sometimes won over division. Should I allow them to copy it? Aiko's reply arrived a week later, thoughtful as always. Ask yourself what Isaiah-san would want. He never sought recognition, only the freedom to help regardless of artificial borders. If this image might build bridges now, when both our countries face choices about who they will become, perhaps that is its purpose. The photograph was hidden when authorities feared its power. Perhaps now is the time for that power to speak. Kenji met the journalists again, allowing them to photograph the original image with their professional camera. They promised to credit the story properly, to place it in appropriate context. Your mother still has the original? The younger journalist confirmed. Always, Kenji replied. Some treasures aren't measured by what they're worth, but by what they prove is possible. As cherry blossoms continued falling around them, Kenji felt a sense of completion. The story his life had been built upon would now travel beyond personal memory into wider consciousness. Not as front-page news, perhaps, but as a quiet counterpoint to narratives of inevitable division. In Chicago, where Isaiah Brooks now treated patients in a community clinic, the story would eventually reach him through colleagues who recognized his younger self in the published image. In Kyoto, Aiko would add the magazine article to her box of letters, another bridge across distance. Their correspondence would continue, spanning decades, two lives running parallel, connected by words on paper, and shared conviction that boundaries could be crossed when courage demanded it. Tokyo, 1972. The Tokyo Peace Museum stood on land once occupied by military barracks. Its modern architecture, all glass and open space, contrasted deliberately with the fortified structures it replaced. Inside, carefully curated exhibits traced Japan's journey from militarism through war, occupation, and into an uncertain but hopeful future. Aiko Tanaka, now in her late 50s, moved slowly through the new exhibition titled Faces of Reconciliation. Her hair had silvered elegantly, face lined by years that had brought both struggle and fulfillment. As one of the museum's cultural advisors, she had helped shape this particular collection, though one specific inclusion had been added without her knowledge. She stopped before a large photograph mounted in the center of the display. Though she owned a copy herself, seeing it here, professionally enlarged, beautifully framed, presented as historical document, brought unexpected emotion welling up. Isaiah and herself during the typhoon rescue. The image that military authorities had tried to destroy. The moment that had shaped so many lives since. Beneath it, a simple caption read, Private Isaiah Brooks and Aiko Tanaka, Heroes of Compassion, 1945. Smaller text below explained the context, how an American medic and Japanese civilian had worked together during a devastating typhoon, saving dozens of lives while defying the rigid separation of occupier and occupied. A museum curator approached, smiling at Aiko's evident surprise. "We wanted to include it without telling you," he explained, "to honor both your contributions." Aiko nodded, momentarily unable to speak. What had once been dangerous connection, hidden in letters, preserved in a single rescued negative, now stood acknowledged in a national institution. The world had not changed completely, but it had changed enough for this truth to be publicly honored. Dr. Brooks approved as well, the curator added. "We contacted him through your son. Isaiah knows?" Aiko asked, using his first name naturally even after all these years. "Yes, he sent this to accompany the display." The curator handed her a letter bearing an American postmark. Isaiah's handwriting had become more refined over decades of medical practice, but remained recognizable. The steady hand that had once bandaged wounds, now recording memories. Aiko moved to a quiet bench near a window, carefully opening the letter. "Dear Aiko, when Kenji wrote about the museum exhibition, memories flooded back as if the decades between had dissolved. I see us clearly still, exhausted, drenched, yet somehow more alive than ever as we worked side by side in the typhoon's aftermath. I'm honored that our small defiance of artificial boundaries will be remembered this way. What seemed like individual choices in the moment, to help regardless of uniform or nationality, now appears as something larger, evidence that humanity can transcend the divisions we create. My medical practice in Chicago continues, though arthritis makes surgery more difficult these days. The civil rights movement has brought changes to America, imperfect, incomplete, but real. My children attend integrated schools. My daughter studies international law, inspired by stories of Japan I've shared since her childhood. Our correspondence across decades has been one of life's unexpected treasures, a connection that survived ocean distance and cultural difference because it was rooted in recognition of shared humanity. I often think of your words from that rain-soaked night. Heart can see. In a world determined to categorize and separate, you saw the person beneath the uniform. I saw the strength behind cultural constraints. Together we glimpsed possibility. My university recently nominated me for an International Humanitarian Award. If selected, it would involve travel to Geneva, with a potential stop in Japan. After all these years of words crossing oceans, perhaps our paths might finally cross again. With enduring respect and friendship, Isaiah Aiko folded the letter carefully, her heart full. Outside, rain began falling gently against the museum glass, echoing that distant typhoon, nature's reminder that some patterns repeated while others transformed. She moved back to the photograph, standing before it as visitors circulated around her. A young Japanese girl stopped beside her, looking up at the image with curious eyes. "Is that really you?" the child asked, recognizing Aiko from her museum advisor photograph near the entrance. "Yes," Aiko answered, simply, "a long time ago." "Were you scared during the typhoon?" Aiko considered the question seriously. "Yes, but fear matters less when you work together." She gestured toward Isaiah in the photograph. "He taught me that." The girl studied the image thoughtfully. "My grandmother says Americans were enemies then." "Many were," Aiko acknowledged, "just as many Japanese were enemies to Americans. But people are more than the uniforms they wear or the countries they come from." She touched the glass gently. "This photograph shows something important, that even in the hardest times, we can choose connection over division." As the child moved on, Aiko remained, allowing memories their space. She heard Isaiah's voice across decades. "I've got you. Hold on." Felt again his steady presence as they navigated rubble and rushing water. Remembered the brief, powerful clasp of hands through cell bars. "Please, stay," she whispered to herself, echoing words spoken long ago at the clinic doorway. "We needed more like you." Rain fell harder against the museum windows, drumming gentle accompaniment to memory. Aiko closed her eyes, listening to its rhythm, the same sound that it accompanied their most difficult challenges and their most honest connections. In Chicago, Isaiah would be seeing patients now, his experienced hands still healing despite age and arthritis. In Tokyo, Aiko stood witness to a history that had tried to separate them, but ultimately failed. Between them stretched decades of letters, a paper bridge across oceans and cultures, proving that some connections, once made, could withstand any storm. Outside, modern Tokyo continued its busy pace, rain-soaked and gleaming. Inside, the photograph held its quiet truth. Two people from worlds at war, choosing compassion when hatred would have been easier. Their story, once censored, now preserved for generations who might learn from it when facing their own impossible divisions. Aiko bowed slightly to the image, honoring not just Isaiah and their shared past, but the enduring possibility their moment represented. Then she turned toward the museum exit, carrying both memory and hope as she stepped back into the continuing present. The rain welcomed her, not typhoon fierce now, but gentle as grace.